In instructing the young students of the infinite way, it must be remembered that the most important passage in Scripture at this point is that to know God aright is life eternal. Now, without that, there's no use of going any further, because it must be self-evident that mankind does not know God. Otherwise, we'd have a whole lot more of life eternal. And there is no use of learning anything until at one point is so well known to us that it is demonstrably known. And that means not merely that we know it up here, but that we work with it. In other words, not merely that we know it in the head, intellectually, through the mind, but that we can almost say, oh, whereas before I was blind, now I see. In other words, the light dawns. Now, I will show you that no part of mankind even suspects what God is. That it is not praying to God, never has. And that even what little result they think they got from prayer didn't come from God. I'm going to sum up how to attain this understanding of God in 3 words: omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence. Not necessarily in that order. You can take them in any order you like. But without these 3 words being not only indelibly impressed into your consciousness, but without the fullest understanding of their meaning, you can never approach God. Let us illustrate. Omniscience means the all-knowing, the all-wise, the all-intelligence. It wouldn't be a bad idea to look up these 3 words in an unabridged dictionary so as to get a wide understanding of them. And then stop and ask yourself this question. Certainly hymns are sung to the all-wise God, and people are always saying, of course God is the all-wise, the all-knowing. But now what happens the next minute? You tell God you've got a pain. You tell God the rent is due. You tell God you need employment. You tell God something or other. And in that instance, you denied God. You absolutely denied God. Just as much if you were to come out and say, I don't believe there is an all-knowing God. Because if you knew God to be the all-knowing, would you ever go to God with any problem? Would you ever go to God to voice anything, to tell him anything, or to try to influence him on your behalf? So that if you once grasp the nature of God as omniscience, you can never again reach up to God or try. In fact, you laugh at yourself every time you think of even dreaming to ask God for peace on earth or for anything else. See that? Now, we spend only a very few minutes in this instruction on the word omniscience. But our teachers are supposed to spend months on it, using what we have said here merely as a reminder. I couldn't possibly give enough instruction or long enough instruction to teach anyone, because it couldn't be taught in 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years. I can only present to you the fact that omniscience must be the first subject of your awareness. And now how long it will take you to really be able to come to where you are never again tempted to tell God anything, to try to influence God, to let God know the problem. I don't know that. But eventually you must get to the place where this is so indelibly a part of your consciousness that when anyone asks you to pray for them, inwardly you'd be laughing out loud. What do you mean by pray for you? Tell God that you need good health tomorrow, or supply, or should I tell God to overcome your enemies? Or change your disposition? Do you see how ridiculous it all sounds when it's put this way? But that is only because, in some measure, God is so real to me as omniscience that I can't ever imagine going into prayer or meditation in any other way than just closing the eyes and starting to listen. Because I have nothing to tell God. But if God utters his voice, the earth melteth. Then what must be my attitude of prayer? To hear the voice of God. God is not in the whirlwind. God is in the still small voice. Now, do you want God? Then, according to Scripture, the only way to get God is to listen until you hear that still small voice. Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. Not thy servant has something to tell you or ask you. Not that your servant wants favors. Your servant wants to hear your voice. Well, is that any different than a child crying and hearing its parent's voice? I'm right here with you. Do not be afraid. And the child settles down immediately? Of course, because to the child, the mother or father is God. When the mother and father is around, who could harm it or what? So with us. If you ever hear the voice of God, the still small voice, if you ever receive an impartation within, if you ever feel an inner release because of God's presence, you won't be afraid of a lion. You won't be afraid of a storm or a flood. What can come nigh thy dwelling place if you really have God in the center of your being and are on that good terms that God speaks to you, utters his voice through you? You see also why there is no room in the infinite way for egotism. We can't heal, we can't protect, we can't enrich you. We can only be the instrument through which the voice of God comes. And that makes us very humble. because we know that I of my own self can do nothing. And I never will get so spiritual that I can do anything, except be a transparency through which the voice of God can speak. So with our teachers and our practitioners, for any of them to believe that they are ever going to get so spiritual as to have spiritual power is immediately to defeat them. The further they go, the more of a transparency they'll be, but because of their nothingness, because they no longer speak to God, they no longer try to influence God or use God. They know enough now to be a clean window pane, to let the light shine through. So, if you work with the nature of God as omniscience, you will find that sooner or later, if you're faithful, that your nature itself will so change that you will never even be tempted. It'll never even come into your thought to tell God anything, to try to influence God in any way, or to get God to do anything. Your new attitude of life will always be keeping the ear open. Even if you're giving a lecture, even if you're teaching, even if you are painting a house, you'll never do anything without this ear being partially opened, because it's only in proportion as you do that you are listening for that voice, which when it comes will melt the whole earth of error. So that one word alone can change your whole nature. And you'll be less of a human being, and you'll be more the Son of God that's always attentive to the Father. Now, the next word is omnipotence. Well, of course, there isn't a human being in all the world that believes God is omnipotence. Not even the hymn writers who have written hymns to omnipotence and omnipotent God. Not a minister in a church that keeps repeating omnipotence of God every week, 52 weeks a year. Not one believes it. They pay lip service to it, because if you ever spend a few weeks or months with the nature of God as omnipotence, and ever get the realization that God is omnipotence, what will you ever need God power for after that? Will there be any other power to take to God? Will there be any power to overcome or rise above or destroy? If God is omnipotence, if you catch the nature of God as omnipotence, can you ever again ask God to do anything? Or even expect it? Well, no. If God could come down to our level of thought, he'd say, well, what is this power that you want me to do something about? Power of sin? Power of disease? Power of lack? Well, if they're powers, then I'm not omnipotence. Then how do you know I'm strong enough for the job? But if I am omnipotence, you don't need my power, because there isn't any other power. You cannot imagine what this does to you, because, well, that's all that's to it. Somebody comes to you and they have this, that, or the other sin or disease, or need or lack. and instantly it must come to you. Can it be a power? That takes away from God's omnipotence. Then not only God can't do anything about it, but neither can I. In some degree, then, everyone gives power to negative forces. We do ourselves to some extent, because no one, so far as I've ever heard, including Jesus Christ, no one has ever caught the full vision of God as omnipotence. It means that all the medical theories of germs is nonsense. It means that the belief that bullets have power is nonsense. It even means go ahead and explode your atomic bombs, because they're not power. Now, it is absolutely true that none of these have power, except the power that universal belief gives them. And the way in which we have proved this in the last 100 years is that if a person comes to us with just a simple cold, and our knowing God's omnipotence stops it, heals it, it couldn't have been a power in the first place. We didn't medicate it. We didn't do any of the things necessary to destroy these germs of colds and flu and grippe. All we did was know God's omnipotence, meaning the non-power of the germ theory, right? Well, if it was healed, then we have proven to that extent, then, this that was brought to us as power isn't power. Other infections from cuts and bruises and blisters and boils. In these 100 years, Christian Science practitioners, unity practitioners, New Thought practitioners, infinite way practitioners, they've handled tens of thousands of cases of blisters and burns and cuts and bruises, and proven that infection is not a power. They haven't proven that God heals those things, because God is no respecter of persons, and why should he do it for a metaphysician and not for the non-metaphysician? What God won't do for a non-metaphysician, he won't do for a metaphysician. God is no respecter of persons. In fact, God works through law. So it isn't God that heals these infections. It is, ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. And the truth is that these infections and germs and beliefs and theories are not power. Now, God hasn't healed these cases for you. God has never healed a case and never will. Healing comes through the illumined consciousness of an individual. And it must be illumined on this point of omniscience and omnipotence. That is the only illumined consciousness there is. Not one who sees visions, not one who has emotional experiences. This is not illumination. The illumined consciousness is the consciousness that knows the truth. And in the Infinite Way writings it says there is no truth about man to be known. The truth has to be known about God. And if you know omniscience and omnipotence, you know enough truth to change your life and the lives of all those who come to you, once you have worked with it long enough so that it isn't an intellectual knowledge, that it becomes an act of awareness. In the Russian mysticism, they have a prayer of what they call a prayer of Jesus, and they teach that if you voice this prayer, never less than 300-400 times a day, never less than 7 days a week, never less than 52 weeks a year, that eventually that prayer goes from the head into the heart. And from then on, you never again have to say it. You listen and it comes up to you. Now that is exactly the Infinite Way teaching, that if you learn the letter of truth first, really learn it, so that you can say, I know that I've got to know omniscience and omnipotence. I know that those are the two things I've got to know. And then work with them and work with them until they go from the head to the heart. After that, you don't have to know them anymore. When someone asks your help, you smile. And your smile is only the front for what's coming up from here. The truth comes up from within. Now, no one is ever going to go very far in healing work or developing a healing consciousness that hasn't come to the conviction of God as omniscience and omnipotence. If it takes a year, if it takes 5 years, if it takes 10 years, you'll never have to say, I wonder what the truth is or what the truth I have to know is. I can tell you in those words. The next thing is to know them spiritually. And that leaves us with omnipresence. Well, of course, anyone that ever catches the significance of omnipresence is automatically freed from fear of any nature. And the reason is this: the only reason any of us has to fear is if we're not in God's presence, because then that puts the deal up to us. What can I do about this? And if I am not sufficient, I'm doomed, right? Whether it's being on a battlefront or being in a city that has contagion or epidemic, what can you do about it if it's just you there alone? On the other hand, what can any of these beliefs do if God is there with you? Now, all through the Infinite Way writings, you will discover how boring I can really get with one idea. The place whereon I stand is holy ground. Where God is, I am. Where I am, God is, because we are inseparably one. Now count, somebody, how many times that appears in the Infinite Way writings, and you'll see how repetitious I can be. But why? Well, just telling you once that God is omnipresent and that God is present where you are may be teaching it to you, but you aren't learning it. It is only when that is drilled into your consciousness day after day, week after week, month after month, that one of these days something inside of you will explode and you'll say, oh, God is here. Or you'll hear inside of you, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And you'll see the idea of all these quotations in the writings. Because, again, like the child and the parent, what more does a child want than the assurance of the parent's presence? What more could we possibly want than the assurance of God's presence? Because come down to face it, what could a bullet do if God was present? Is a bullet more than God? Is a bomb more than God? And once you perceive that, no, God is greater. Greater? That isn't the right word. God is omnipotence. See how these words keep going back and forth and back and forth? And they support each other and bolster each other so that you really can live your whole life with those three words. Now, strangely enough, I spoke at the start about this being an unfoldment as to the nature of God. In the infinite way, we have two major unfoldments. Two, without which you're not in the infinite way at all. And the second one is the nature of error. Well, now just go back over what I've said and see if I haven't included the nature of error. Without ever mentioning it, you've already got it. In the face of omnipotence, what is the nature of error? Non-power. In the nature of omniscience, what is the nature of error? In the nature of omnipresence, what is the nature of error? It's non-presence, isn't it? So, non-power, non-presence, non-intelligence, non-law, which would come under omniscience. And so in these three words you have the nature of God and the nature of error. But you have to consciously remember that you have just handled the nature of error. In other words, almost anybody in the world that comes to metaphysics loves to talk about the omnipotence of God and omniscience and omnipresence and so forth. But they do not thereby rule out the presence and power of something else. It is only when they realize consciously that the nature of error reveals the non-presence, the non-power, and the non-intelligence or law that you've got the full circle. Now, if you develop that consciousness, certainly as you develop the consciousness of omniscience, and at the same moment say, but this then precludes the possibility of error having law, intelligence, substance, or activity. When you are living with omnipotence and then realize, but at the same moment, this omnipotence means the non-power of any form of error, evil, threat. And the realization of omnipresence automatically means the non-presence of the appearance. Now you've brought the two into one. You've got the whole. Do you see that? One of the reasons for non-healing is the belief that God is going to do something to the error. And in our consciousness, we're waiting for something that can't happen. We're waiting for a God power to do something. You see that? That not only is a barrier to healing work, but The patients who are unconsciously accepting that are standing in the way of their own being healed. Because all the time you are presenting this truth to them, they're sitting around waiting for God to walk on the face of the water and do something. God is not going to walk on the face of the water to do anything. And the belief that God is proves that we do not know the name or nature of God. You see, let us start with planting a seed in the ground. Nature doesn't start to do something. Before the seed is in the ground, the law of nature is operating. Only there's no seed for it to operate on. But when you put the seed in the ground, the law that's already there goes to work. Right? There is no law sitting off to the side waiting for you to put that seed in the ground and then starting to go to work, is there? No. No. The law of God is omnipresence. Therefore, it can't start being present now. You can't bring God into action. It isn't your prayers that brings God power. The God power is omnipresence. Your prayer is the connecting link with you. It is just like a turning on of your radio. When you turn on your radio, you do not inaugurate any program. The program is omnipresence. By turning on your set, you merely tune in to it. And so it is that anyone waiting for God to do something is wasting their time. God is not going to do something a minute from now. Whatever God is going to do, God is doing, and God has been doing since the beginning of time. You can't start or inaugurate a God action. Nothing will do that. Being good won't do it. Reforming won't do it. Being moral won't do it. Tithing won't do it. You cannot start God in action. God is omnipresence. You can only close your eyes to the appearance and tune in. Now, to know this is to know something about the nature of God that the world does not know. The universal belief is that if you pray to God, God answers. There are so many unanswered prayers that we know this cannot be. The universal belief is that if you get baptized, or you get communed, or you get buried in holy ground, that God goes to work and does something for you. You must accept this as a truth. Man cannot influence God. Nothing that man can do will influence God. Not being good, not being moral, not reforming, not being charitable, None of these will ever influence God. It will bring you into at one-ment with the law of God, which you aren't when you're being bad. Or unkind or uncharitable. Do you see? That is why that at some period in the midst of our badness, we have to stop just long enough to tune into God. And then our badness is turned into goodness. We don't stop being bad and become good because we don't have that power. We don't have even the power to lose our ignorance about God and turn it to wisdom about God. All we have the power to do is stop whatever we're doing and stop whatever we're thinking and tune in. God will make us good and God will enlighten us. Not because God will do it now, but because of omnipresence. The power of God is there whenever you turn into it. See how omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience must constantly be our aim of realization. Any sinner can contact God. They only have to stop long enough to tune in and desire God, like the thief on the cross or the woman taken in adultery that looks up to the Christ. That's all it takes. Neither one of them stopped being bad. They just paused long enough in their badness to desire right. And then the activity, the omnipresence of the Christ. And both of those examples show that Christ was present when they reached out for him. It doesn't have to be Jesus present. The moment anyone reaches out, Christ will be present either invisibly or visibly in some form. Now, this leads inevitably to a correct understanding of prayer. And it is only through prayer that you have contact with God. But by now the question is in your mind, how shall I pray? Because I've certainly taken away from you the need for any words or thoughts. There's nothing you can think that's going to influence God. There's nothing you can say that's going to reach God. What will do it? And I will tell you in one word: motive. Motive. All the efficacy of prayer is summed up in the one word: motive. In other words, if God is omniscience, God must know what's in our heart. So what is the use of going to God and saying to God, make me pure, when that isn't what we mean at all? It is far better to go to God without words and without thoughts, but with the inner motive: God, you know the workings of my heart, reward me accordingly. And if your motive isn't right, you'll get an awful wallop. If your motive is merely make me well or make me prosperous or make me happy, there'll be no answer. Because my kingdom is not of this world. This world may make you healthy, wealthy, and wise. My kingdom is spiritual. And so if you come to God, you'd better come wanting some spiritual grace. And forget what it is in the human picture you seem to need. Because you can't reach God with that. The only way you can reach God if you believe in omnipotence, if you believe in omniscience, is to close your eyes realizing, well, I can't tell God anything. But God searches the heart, the marrow, and the intents of the mind. Therefore, God, who knoweth me, here I am. And as long as my motive is to receive God, God's wisdom, God's voice, God's presence, God's power, something of a spiritual nature that has no relationship to my human world, it will adjust my human world. It will adjust it, not I. I cannot decide what I want with one exception. The moment I have awakened to the fact that I need God or I need truth, then I can have the desire to go where God or the truth is to be found or revealed. It's true, God is omnipresence. And therefore it is true that a person could attain it of themselves without any outside help from books or teachers. But they may have my experience of having to take 35 years to accomplish it. Or 30 years. See that? Because remember that from 1909 to, it was 20 years, 1929, I was searching inside of myself. I knew no books to go to. I knew no such thing as teachers or anything of this thing. So I had nowhere to search but within myself, and 20 years later it happened. So if time isn't any element, you can do it all by yourself. But at least have the handicap of knowing that if I'm to find God, the kingdom of God within me, at least I will only find it if my motives are pure. If I want God for some purpose of my own, I can tell you the nature of God is such that God doesn't give anybody anything for themselves. That is why God doesn't really reveal himself. Well, put it the other way. Why no individuals receive the revelation of God unless the receiving of that revelation will enable them to go out and preach the gospel and feed the hungry and so forth and so on. Because God never does anything for you or for me. God never reveals the truth to you or for me for your profit or mine, or for your health or mine. You have no knowledge of the nature of God if you ever believe that God does anything for anybody. Therefore, while God is omnipresence and ready to be revealed, I cannot accept or have the revelation because I am not open. I'm only open to the extent of receiving God for me. You see that? I've closed the door. If I want God, I've got to want God for whatever the consequences may be. And if God tells me to leave mother and father and sister and brother, then that's my job. If God tells me to give up my business, if God tells me to do this, I've got to do it. I can't do it because I'd like to do it. I can't do it because my preference would be that. Ah, no. But at least in going to God, there has to be a pure motive. And that pure motive isn't to get something for me or for my family. Like mothers sometimes say to me, isn't it right for me to want my children to be educated? And I have to answer, I suppose it is. But that has nothing to do with God. That has to do with you. If you want God to be interested in your children being educated, then you have to want God to educate all children. And that means you have to be willing to help with the education of some other children besides your own. Because to think that you can go to God and get the graciousness of God for your child, to spit in the face of God, because your child is no more important to God than my child or his child or her child. That is why prayer is a farce if it contains anything of a personal nature, or selfish nature, or exclusive nature. It is why the words on our lips and the thoughts in our minds sometimes are the very barriers to the prayers, because we're lying. We're lying to ourselves and we're lying to God. But you can't lie to God because God searches the bones, the marrow, the intents of the heart. Therefore, far better to forget all words and all thoughts and go to God saying, God, how can I fool you? Here I am, fill me. See that? And you're much better in a chance then to receive God's grace. But because there are teachers and teachings, there really isn't any need to wait 20 years to get an answer. If we open ourselves for the Christ will somehow meet our need, and it can very well be through a book, a teaching, or a teacher. But always remember that these are but the instruments. And the purpose of a book, a teacher, or a teaching is to reveal the nature of God to you so that you yourself can make your contact. And then when the voice of God speaks to you, it won't change the principles any, but it will certainly change the nature of the message, so that you will have your individual way of presenting it. You see, prayer, the nature of God, the nature of error, they're all interlocking. One leads to the other. When you're through, it's a circle. Through your understanding of omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, you automatically see the nature of error. When you see the nature of error, instead of wasting time fighting it or praying to God to do something about it, you're enabled to sit quietly and listen, and you're in prayer. See how they're all interrelated. You will not reach God without prayer, because even when you know the nature of God and the nature of error, if you do not attain that inner stillness that enables you to hear the still small voice, it isn't complete. You've only got knowledge up in the head. Without this knowledge up in the head, you won't get the inner peace to enable you to pray aright. It's all interlocking. We need the letter of truth. We need it as a raft. We need it as a means to an end. But no matter how much of the letter we have, if we don't go the next step further and let that lead us to the spirit, the awareness, the consciousness, we do not complete our work. And therefore, if you were giving a treatment or voicing a prayer for someone, no matter how much truth you know and include in it, be sure that you wind up with, now God, I didn't say any of this for your benefit. This was all for my benefit so I could get still inside, but now it's your turn. I'm listening, I'm prepared to be still. Now you're in prayer. Now you're in meditation. The other was the preparation for it. So, in your teaching, you must teach every one of these points. And as you yourself live with these points, you'll have 10 times more to teach about them than I have given you, because I've only given you the essence, which will multiply itself within you. You can see that as you are teaching beginners, that you probably should only take one of the 3 words for a lesson. Omniscience today, omnipotence in the next lesson, omnipresence in the next lesson, the nature of error as the natural consequent in the next lesson, prayer in the next lesson. In other words, you should have at least 5 lessons out of this one. Because I can say to you who have been studying all these years what I have said in this hour with some degree of confidence that you can accept it. But could I do that with a beginner? Heavens, no, I give mental indigestion. How could they embrace all of these things that we have put into this hour? Therefore, in teaching, make 5 lessons out of this one. Then after you've taken 5 lessons, use the 6th for review and tie them all up together. I have done it in this one period, tied all of these up together, but I have done it for you, who I know has years and years of background of study, and who are now just assimilating all of this, tying a string around it, and saying, oh, I knew every one of these things he said for years, but I didn't tie them all up together in one bundle, nor perhaps see the full significance of them. Do you see that? That's all right for you. And when you come to where you are teaching those who are ready to become teachers, it will be all right to do it. But as long as you are teaching classes, do not hope to do more than take 1 and make 5 lessons of this, and then the 6th one for review, and if they haven't done well in the 6th lesson, make the 7th lesson another review. In fact, don't go on to another subject until you're sure that this class has caught the importance of this point and knows how. And then, in teaching, don't forget, 6 months later, bring that same class back and go through 1 or 2 hours of review of the first 5 lessons. Because it's easy for them to forget, it's easy for them to lose it. The only time you can be sure that anyone won't lose it is after they've had the demonstrable realization with signs following. Then you can say, good, you're safe on this, I don't need you anymore, you can go on from here. But not your average student. They have to have a review, especially on points like this. They won't like these lessons as well as they will the lessons about sitting on cloud 9 and hearing about inner initiations and seeing visions and so forth. But remember that as important as those lessons are, they are of no use at all without this. Because this is what makes truth demonstrably truth with signs following. It is the reason that some teachings, in fact all of the major metaphysical teachings of the day, are going backward. They're not increasing, they're decreasing. And the reason is that they're all so eager to sit around and talk about this lovely God that they will not come right down to the brass tack and say, yeah, God is that lovely, but He isn't doing anything for this world. Only for those who make themselves consciously one with truth. See that? And you'll find most of the world does not want that hard work. But you have to make a choice as a teacher, whether you want the numbers or whether you want to attract only those who do really want to get somewhere in life. I personally would rather turn out 12 fine teachers and practitioners while I'm on earth than I would build a following of 500,000 students. Because I couldn't hold the 500,000 students after I left here unless I've got the 12 teachers that can make this operate. Because the 500,000 won't. They won't. Not in this age. In future ages they will, when they're born into this consciousness. But right now, 12 marvelous practitioners and teachers are worth more than 500,000 followers. Sure, you can get richer off the 500,000 followers, and if wealth or popularity means anything, I guess that's it. But if personal accomplishment means something, which it should to a teacher, then believe me, if they could turn out 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 really and truly who have caught the metaphysical and spiritual, mystical vision and can work with it and can go out first of all to heal others and then to teach others, you've done a far better job, even though the rest of the world won't know about it. Yes, I go all over the world, but there's only a few people in each place that knows me. I'm not known to this world. I'm not even known to Hawaii. Why? Because I haven't made myself concerned with numbers. I could just as well have public meetings every week. Now, first I must have the nucleus, the small group that can really work. Then I can let it expand as far as it will expand. Now you see that having said all of this, the value only comes now when I stop saying it and you sit for meditation and say, Father, we now know all the truth, but now how about an extra word from you? Because that is the word that has signs following. Even to have a feeling of God is on the scene. God was omnipresent before, okay? But the roof could cave in, and the omnipresence of God wouldn't stop it. But a meditation with signs following would stop the roof falling in. Believe me, it would hang suspended without touching you. Not by my power, not by my goodness, not by my love, by God's grace. But God's grace, you can only be sure that God's grace is on the field when that assurance is there. Do you see that? And so it is, no matter how much you teach your students, don't let them go away until there's been a meditation to consolidate it, to enable them to assimilate it, and to let the seal be put on it. Now, no human teacher can put a seal on a lesson. God has to put the final seal on it in some way. And so it is, whether it is I am teaching you, or you are teaching a beginner's class or an advanced class, always remember that the seal is placed on the lesson when the meditation takes place. And that is when you bring it all into livingness. You bring it down from the head to the heart. Well, you have here 6 lessons, and whether you teach in one city or another, this must be the first 6 lessons that are taught, because without this foundation, anything you give them afterward has no foundation to rest on, and the house will come tumbling down. There must be a foundation based on some measure of awareness of the nature of God, the nature of error, and the nature of prayer, and that's all combined in these 6 lessons, the 6 being the review. Each one to have a meditation beforehand to ensure that what comes through your lips will be the voice of God, and concluding with a meditation that God puts the seal on it. In this concluding meditation, remember, we need no words or thoughts. We're just sitting in a state of receptivity to let God place the seal on our lesson and our meditation.